Ladies and gentlemen, please settle down. Tonight's performance will include misleading marketing, bad Cosby impressions, and Shakespearean spoilers as we examine the crisis of bad audiences here on Created Things.
Greetings and welcome to Created Things, the only arts podcast that is perpetually and permanently postured as an angry mob against the angry mob. I'm artist and psychotherapist Jacob Flores Popchik, and with me is my good and excellent friend, medievalist, Catholic priest, weird guy, Father Gabriel Toretta. How are you doing, my dude?
Yeah, I'm doing most of those full time actually at this point. Yeah, pretty full time.
Yeah. And you've brought them together in a really cohesive identity, which I find impressive.
I feel like, I have I feel like my personal vibe is like Asian fusion cuisine. We're just going to take a bunch of things that don't belong together and not going to respect their sources. And then we're going to call that life.
But it tastes pretty good, But
so like as long as you don't know what sushi tastes like, it tastes good.
Right. You mean you don't like ahi sushi tacos with
drowning in mayonnaise?
Like drowning mayonnaise and bok choy and
that all seems
weirdly everything bagel seasoning.
Also, you got to have everything bagel seasoning. Otherwise, what else? I'd probably also put some pumpkin spice on top of that, just because otherwise, how are you gonna know that some white people funded this? I respect that.
Well, I will say I've been actually looking into some of that stuff because I'm having so talk about your weirdness and your brand, talk about mine. I'm having a SpongeBob themed dinner party this weekend.
That doesn't surprise me.
For which I am creating as close to cartoon accurate Krabby Patties as I possibly can. But according to...
This is the food that they eat on SpongeBob?
The food Krabby Patties are the burger that make everybody go crazy. Yeah, you don't watch SpongeBob apparently. Okay, Krabby Patties.
I've never seen it. Yeah.
Oh my god, Krabby Patties are like SpongeBob works at a fry cook fast food place, and Krabby Patties are like crack for all the people in the town. And there's the most delicious little burger in the world. It's one of those things when you watch it as a kid, I think there are lots of those things where you watch a food in a show or you see it in a book and you go, that must taste like the best thing in the world. I remember Frog and Toad.
Oh yeah.
The book Frog and Toad. They have that chocolate ice cream and it just looks better than any chocolate ice cream I've ever had in my whole life. It just looks so good. And Krabby Patties are that for burgers. And so I'm trying to recreate that, but the creator of that show was a vegan and may he rest in peace, also claimed that the Krabby Patty itself was entirely vegan because fish would not eat beef or each other. So
seems unfair.
So I'm trying to create a Krabby Patty, like a burger, not only vegan, but using a lot of seaweed components. And I found this really amazing Alaskan place that makes pickles, like dill pickles out of Alaskan bullwhip kelp. So I'm really excited about that.
Okay. I accept that. Yeah.
I my own little fusion thing.
Yeah. That's how this is creative. It's fun. That's really delightful. I'm always up for trying new kinds of pickles. No limit there.
You are a pickle boy. In another life, you'd be a pickle influencer.
I am already a pickle influencer because I influence pickles by eating them. There's always the danger when you think of foods that you were really into, that you saw or read about or whatever as a kid that seemed because of course they're just going to seem like the very best. There's always the Turkish delight problem, which in Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, right? I'd never heard of Turkish delight, and it's so delicious that it makes Edmund sell his family to the devil, it's so delicious, right? So you think this is incredible. I don't even know what it's like. It's not because Lewis doesn't even describe it, which has this incredible force. Of course he doesn't describe it because it would have been normal that people would have known what it was. But if you're an American kid growing up in the 80s, you don't know what it is, and the internet doesn't exist yet, so you can't look it up. And so it just has this like intensity of sort of like wonder and marvel, and you think this just must be the most amazing thing on the planet. And then like when I was finally an adult and walked past it, I just happened to walk past a display of like a store just like selling Turkish Delight, and I didn't even have to sell anybody to the devil to buy it. And then like I bought it, and I was so excited. I tore it into it, I ate it, and it's kind of like, oh, it kind of tastes like rose water. But it kind of makes you
it's just
choke.
a gummy. Yeah, it's
like
essentially a gummy,
but it's kind of covered in, it's like tastes like rose water, which is not very appealing, and then it kind of tastes like dust.
I will say I actually really like Turkish Delight, and even I don't think that it matches the Narnia kind of explanation, including the Jim Henson Wonderworks movie adaptations, which are the only good versions. Screw the terrible Disney versions. Where Angelica Houston is the White Witch, like brings it this like silver,
it's the silver
thing, and and it like lets off like steam.
Exactly,
it's almost like erotic, almost.
Yeah. And you also don't really see what they are, right? Like, because
no,
this is that's part of what the force of it.
You're like, this must be incredible.
Yeah. Well, I hope your Krabby Patties live up to the reputation of Jim Henson's version of the Turkish Delight.
I wish you could be there, since you're such a fan of both fusion and weird pickles. I feel like you'd be a really good judge. A totally unbiased one because you've never seen SpongeBob.
I've never seen SpongeBob. Yeah,
I'll just mail you one in Austria.
Pack one up into a box, put it on a slow boat to China. Eventually, it'll find its way to Austria, and then I'll eat it and die of food poisoning. It'll be great.
Perfect. Yeah, perfect. Well, since it's all plant based, you might actually not. You might be able to eat it.
Actually, it'll be fine. Yeah, it'll be fine.
Yeah. You can eat Impossible Burger raw, right? Anyway, that is time out of nothing, because I can't even think of a good transition.
You can't even force a transition like I forced a transition.
I can't.
That reminds me of.
Well, see, normally we record these things pretty late at night for me, which is when my brain is most kooky. And this episode we're recording kind of earlier in the morning for me, which is when I'm still piecing my brain together. So I can't think of my feet quite the same way.
Sad.
With transitions, but maybe you can give us one. Either way, this is kind of a different episode for us, because we often talk about like art motifs and different art practices maybe, but I think kind of central, though never quite explicitly said, to a lot of our conversations is the idea of connoisseurship, right? The idea of how to appreciate art. I mean, that's sort of the unspoken reason why we're doing the podcast is appreciating different things that are overlooked in art, right? And sometimes there are these things that happen in the culture that have to do with connoisseurship in the arts that even we cannot ignore. And one of those things I feel has been happening recently. And it's something that people have sort of coined kind of an audience crisis. And that is that, at least as the public narrative has been going, post-pandemic, audiences in theater specifically, I mean, there's definitely a lot of this in movies, in movie theaters, but particularly in traditional theater settings, whether that's opera, musical theater, stage plays, philharmonic performances, people have become so rowdy that it is actually becoming a point of international discussion among the kind of people who own theaters, the kinds of like producers who put on these productions in the first place, in a quite kind of pearl clutching way, about what are we going to do about this audience crisis, about the fact that audiences are becoming so rowdy that the art itself seemingly cannot coexist with their reaction to it.
Right.
And that seems right up our alley, even if it's not exactly the kind of thing we talk about. And there's some pretty weird examples of this that I've been looking at. But I wonder if because you are actually in Europe, and I know you recently went to the UK and visited the Globe Theatre, and a lot of the stories I've been looking at are coming out of the UK specifically. It seems like a lot of the craziest ones are happening there. Is this something that you've encountered in any of the theatrical experiences you've had recently, or is this something you've been aware of at all?
No, I mean, certainly not to that extent. I didn't actually go to any performances when I was in England. I didn't, unfortunately, have the time. So I would sort of toured around the globe, but didn't go to a performance there. Right. I mean, certainly contemporary English culture, like to some extent more than contemporary American culture. Certainly from like a continental European perspective, the sort of Western culture that has the sort of worst reputation for rowdy, out of control, bad behavior is England, actually more than America by a pretty big margin, which I think can be a bit of a surprise for Americans because we tend to not have a very concrete sense of like English people as a culture that lives in 2023 and more one that, mysteriously has all of the accents in films set in ancient Rome or whatever,
right. Yeah.
Since every historical film
England is perpetually Victorian to us, both before England was a thing and even now.
It's just how it is. But there's sort of, and listen, I'm not speaking about I don't know about the culture as a whole, but like this is certainly a topic of internal conversation in England. There's this in the end, I think fairly noxious, but also kind of interesting contemporary novelist named V.S. Naipaul, who won the Nobel Prize for Literature in like 2001, I think 2001. He's from Trinidad and Tobago, but lives in England, has lived in England for a long time. He wrote a awful but revelatory novel about like sort of some of these problems in British culture, this specific type of problem and sort of whatever. So this has been a long topic of conversation for a long time. Whether it's a specifically English problem, I just don't know enough to say, but like certainly from those kinds of experiences and like the sort of reputation that like tourist destinations on like the continent and stuff have about like right now contemporary English people, it's not like a total shock. Now those are broad pattern things, and so that's not fair, it's just, but I'm just saying like that's what it is. It's kind of a broad cultural reception sort of pattern. Here, like, so I live in Vienna, and Vienna has a lot of really wonderful things about it. And one of the wonderful things about it is that it has a really super duper vibrant cultural scene in all of these things. So like theater and opera and orchestral performances and these kinds of things. So I take advantage of that as much as I can. I would say the most I've seen is sort of like it's relatively normal levels of like kind of unrest and being kind of like rude to the people around you. I'd say relatively normal. The things I've experienced have actually been from in two different theatrical performances in two different theaters, actually from old ladies, from old Austrian ladies, who I don't think fit into anybody's cultural pattern of like audience members behaving badly, but this is not a matter of grave consequence, but I want to tell the story anyway because it was hilarious. I was at a performance of basically a two-person play, like a contemporary two-person play called "Together Alzheimer's is Better Together." And it's about a couple, a husband-wife couple who are like in the end stages of Alzheimer's in a nursing home together. It was a marvelous play, like really, really marvelous and really beautifully played. But so it's about these two very elderly people who have Alzheimer's and like are not hearing or perceiving the world right. And it was just hilarious because there were these two old ladies who were sitting directly behind me who kept screaming the whole time things like, "Are they supposed to be in the bathroom? Can you hear them? I can't hear them. Why are they whispering?"
Oh God.
It was amazing. I thought at first I was angry about it, but then I thought, well, I guess this is their play more than it is my play. So I just have to accept this. It's like, Okay.
That's such a dark, but like kind of empathetic take.
You just like, you kind of gotta roll with it. It's like, I'm kind of the interloper here, not them.
Oh God. But you haven't seen, it doesn't sound like, the kinds of stuff I've been seeing in the news a lot. And thank God I haven't experienced any of this myself, because my experience of theater has always been both really, really positive and kind of abundantly reverent, right? Like even as a kid, going to church was like a reverent thing to do, but like my parents would let me choose like one stuffed animal to bring with me to mass, right? And to kind of both get me through it and to give me some kind of emotional connection to it. That was never going to happen if I went to the ballet or to like a big play or something. That was sort of ultra formal. And I loved it because of that, and I've seen some quote unquote, annoying behavior, people eating snacks too loud or different things like that. But even at movie theaters, right, which are mostly trash, they're not in any way, shape, or form comparable to, theatrical playhouses as they, once were in sort of the heyday of cinema. I've never really seen like a fight break out or anything. I'll see rowdier behavior in terms of people, cheering when the hero punches the villain in the face and things like that. But that's on a certain level charming. I've never seen anything like the kinds of stories that I've been observing since kind of the end of the lockdowns with theater resurging. One of the big UK ones that happened most recently, at time of recording anyway, was that a absolutely massive fight, like a physical altercation between several rows of audience members happened in, I guess, Manchester, England, during a touring performance of the musical adaptation. I can't believe what I'm saying, of the musical adaptation of the 80s romantic movie The Bodyguard. So I guess they've done a version of The Bodyguard. This is the kind of thing
that I would expect to get people's temperatures rising. Yes.
Yeah. So you're saying you would be so angry with the show that you would punch people. It seems like people were punching each other, I guess, because others were singing along with the music too loudly.
Okay.
So the response was, you're behaving really badly in theater by singing along with this musical. I'm going to respond 100 times worse by
punching you,
becoming physically violent with you.
Okay. Yeah. Well,
specifically, this occurred during the climactic number "I Will Always Love You." I guess this musical uses a lot of Whitney Houston. We've talked a weird amount of about jukebox musicals lately. I think I was the first person.
It's a weird theme here. Yeah, it's like don't bring up Twilight, otherwise that's going to be like another. We're going to conjoin. We're going to cross the streams of weird things.
I would kill for a jukebox musical of Twilight. I hope it's in development.
Would you sell your family to the devil for a jukebox musical of Twilight full of Turkish delight?
Full of Turkish. So is Turkish Delight playing the characters?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not going to write the whole play for you. Okay, focus. Yeah, I'm not going to do all the work for you.
I could deal with sort of VeggieTale style anthropomorphized Turkish Delight bopping around and playing the characters of Twilight. I think that's just sort of magic mushroom enabled for me to imagine selling my family for. Also in the UK, there was kind of these conversations that I was reading about happening between several different theaters, part of the Ambassador Theatre Group across the UK. I think they're the largest theater operating company in the United Kingdom. Just having discussions actually with their advertising companies to try to change the wording so as to not imply to people that they wanted interactivity in these shows, because even without the physical violence component, which is obviously, the worst part, people are dancing during shows. People are singing during shows. People are, rooting for the characters very loudly during shows. And so they're putting a lot of work into changing the kind of advertising bylines of things to take away wording like best party in town, or this musical will have you dancing in the aisles, right? These sorts of phrases are very clearly, to me anyway, hyperbole, right? They're talking about conveying an emotion that you'll be wanting to dance in the aisles, not that you are being invited to do so.
Yeah, but
Oh, no, you go ahead.
I'd say, like, I don't know. I mean, so it's interesting. Like, you look into these events, and like, particularly this thing with like the bodyguard and like fights and like this. It's like, obviously there's a lot about this. It's like very crass and very gross. Like something. There are many things are wrong here. That are contributing to all of this, and that's bad. But like, I don't know. It's like, it's interesting because in thinking about this and I was looking up different stories and stuff, I found myself also like having a bit of a hard time, like being sympathetic, to like concerns about this for a number of reasons.
Oh, and interesting.
Like, yeah. And like, this is a little bit, I just kind of want to think through this, not just right now, but through as we're talking today, cause like, so part of it, there's like there are genre problems that I think are frankly understandable here. So like, these are such theater, like, Broadway, West End, like theater advertising cliches, like best party in town, dancing in the aisles, etc.
Sure. Yeah.
That like, I mean, I get it. Like, it's best party in town. Now that seems to be pretty clearly analogous speech because it's not actually a party in any sense. Dancing in the aisles is not actually analogous speech. Like, that's a thing that's fully physically possible too. And like, seems like like you hear that often enough. I don't know. I mean, it just doesn't seem completely crazy to me. That like, you say like, yeah, the music is so hot and you'll be dancing in the aisles. Then you get up and you want to dance in the aisles and it's like be jumped by a bodyguard, so that seems a little bit weird to me. And I'm glad that there's being like a conversation about this with among like advertising groups that like, maybe there is a certain amount of
people are being really literal.
Yeah, maybe we are like actually creating an environment that enables, like, we're contributing to creating an environment that enables this kind of behavior. Again, like, I'm not at all interested in identifying like one single cause, but I'm just saying like, what are things that we can point to that feed into this? And I do think so. Like, so partly this is a genre problem, like with the way that communication is working here. If we don't actually mean it, we shouldn't be saying it, in part because like people may not have gone to a show before or may not go very often. And so there is a real sense of like, well, I guess I'm going to be told what I can be expected to do here in a certain sense, I think part of the reason, so I just wanted to put that out there. I think part of the reason I'm having the hardest time, like, finding this naturally sympathetic, even though, like, if I imagine, I've read some of these stories and stuff, and I imagine, like, if I was in an opera or if I was in a stage production or something, and people were acting like this, like, I would not be a happy camper, right? I think part of the reason why I'm finding it unsympathetic is that is because, like, the most extreme and recent example that we know of, the one that you just talked about, is from this nightmare debacle of a jukebox musical of a 1980s Whitney Houston movie that never needed to be remade into any form by anyone ever. And so, like, I feel that the thing itself is so intensely, insanely unserious that you're like stealing people's money by proposing this to them as something that will be worth them spending, I don't know, $100, $150 to see live. And then when at the very best, the thing that's going to be is just like a live performance of songs that you could hear on a movie for $1. And I find this, and so I'm fully recognizing that like there are some things about this that's dishonest or not totally consistent with me, because I would be really angry if this happened in something that I was at and liked. But like this just seems sort of, it's like, well, actually, if you're putting on a stage production of The Bodyguard, like actually, I kind of feel like within the limits of physical violence, you know, like I kind of feel like you deserve whatever you get. Because you're the one who did the first wrong thing, which was steal up these people's money.
Well, and then the second wrong thing was singing along with it. And then the third wrong thing is people then punching the people who sang along with it. So it's just a series of everybody saying,
the feeling of bad,
well,
like, bad things cause bad things. Yeah.
Sort of an Adam and Eve, like, well, it's not my fault because she gave me the apple, sort of the passing the buck kind of a thing. Yeah. And look, I would be, so, you know, we're both snobs, and my heart always sort of is torn when things like that happen, because I do think shows like, I'll be honest, I mean, as sort of hippy dippy as I am compared to you, I do think shows like The Bodyguard or Rocky the Musical, or, you know, a lot of these kinds of adaptations are artistically bankrupt, right? I mean, from a production side. But the reason I'm torn is because they're really talented artists who, just out of a need to survive and like make money and eat, become a part of these productions, whether it's, you know, I mean, just in the two examples I threw out there, you know, the capacity one has to have as a singer and a performer to pull off, you know, Whitney Houston music twice a day, 7 days a week, you know, in a show like that while emoting. That's no slouch of a performer. You know, that's an incredibly talented group of people. And something as silly as Rocky the Musical, that I can't even say with a straight face, has some of the most groundbreaking choreography of the last 20 years on any Broadway show. The way that the choreographer came in, he's pretty, I don't remember his name right now, which is bad, but my wife would, because of her dance background. And, you know, the way he studied, you know, boxing and pulled it together with the dance, and they brought the ring out into the center of the audience. It kind of floats out over. I mean, it's just like, there's some real, and like King Kong the Musical is another great example of this. Like, why would you want King Kong to be a musical? But there's like a giant 3-story puppet that's entirely, you know, pulled around by, I think, like 9 or 10 different puppeteers, each controlling a different part. And it's not animatronic at all. It's like all being held by actual puppeteers. Like, I'm Kong's left hand, I'm Kong's right hand. Like, these are really amazing performers. So as creatively bankrupt as I find this sort of concept or conceit of these shows, my heart also breaks for all of the talent and the real artists whose effort and blood and sweat and tears and time away from their families are then undermined by the dumbass in row 4 beating the crap out of the dumbass in row 5. You know, like that, even if I disagree with the existence of the show, that sucks.
Right. Yeah. No, I mean, that's obviously for sure. Now, of course, from the artist side, it's also, I mean, there is also humiliation involved in this. I mean, like I got to know just a little bit of, is he a trumpeter? Anyway, a guy who plays brass, who plays brass for like all the Broadway shows that come through Chicago. And I was talking to them a little about it, and I just said, like, I mean, that's cool. I mean, great. That's awesome, dude. Like, that's really cool you do that. But like, I'm assuming mostly this is more painful than it is enjoyable, right? And he's like, oh yeah, you know, because I
have friends who've been in Cats, right, both on Broadway and then, you know, choreographed regional productions, who are like, and there's the response of either the copium, where you convince yourself that this is really amazing and totally worth being a part of, and then there's the people who are like, yeah, it sucks. Like, it's a paying gig, but I'm going to put my best self into it.
Yeah, which is all great. You know, that's you know, that's actually something really important. Like, I hope that's a consistent theme that we come to, which is like, I mean, when you're in the thing, your obligation is to do the thing as best as you possibly can, you know? So like there's real beauty that's good for those people. That's all great. And I'm totally with you. Bad behavior is bad behavior, period. You know, that's just because like these shows don't deserve to be made and shouldn't be made. Like that doesn't necessarily give you the right to act badly. I mean, it doesn't give you the right to do things that are wrong, period. Sure. The question is just like, where is the limit here?
Said the priest.
Yeah, said the priest, right? I mean, so just saying like, you know, you can like evil deeds are always evil deeds, but like,
but you have an easier time empathizing with some evil deeds over others, depending on the theatrical context.
That's exactly right. And like, so prescinding from the actual physical fighting, you know, sort of like go into a bodyguard performance, like pretty hopped up on the hooch, and then like getting bored halfway through. And of course I'm narrating a story of my own here because I don't know what these people's situations were, but like getting bored halfway through, completely losing patience with it, and just crowing along in the most awful kind of way. Like that's not good because like it's because of how disrespectful it is for other people. But like
there's a level to which you go. There's a level to which you go, if I were the confessor for the person who like shows up in my church after the show and they're going like, oh, I did this terrible thing, I punched somebody out of the bodyguard, you'd be like, well, that was wrong, but I empathize.
But you were at the bodyguard, and actually I think you did. So you confessed two things. So you punched somebody out and you went to the bodyguard. So
with that in mind, let me propose to you two examples of this phenomenon stateside that might be more appalling to your and my, I will own it, snobbish predilections. So recently, within the last like 6 months or so, there was a production of Death of a Salesman, which I don't know how you feel about it. I think it's, you know, one of the all-time kind of great American plays. I love Death of a Salesman.
It will not surprise you to know that I despise Death of a Salesman. Not as much as I despise The Crucible, but I find Arthur Miller to be a liar and a fraud. So there it is.
You don't have a chill opinion about literally anything. There is nothing that you're
true.
like, oh, yeah.
I give chill opinions sometimes. But Arthur Miller's a liar.
I challenge you, audience, listen back to all whatever number of episodes we have at this point. If you can find one example of Father Gabriel giving a chill, yeah, that's cool, that's fine.
Yeah, that's all right. I don't really feel strongly about
it.
Opinion but like whatever.
On any one thing, I will send you free podcast swag. I mean that personally, because that just, I don't think that's ever happened in your whole life. But even if you disagree or dislike personally the aesthetics of Arthur Miller, or the tools he uses rhetorically, I mean, you can't deny it is a classic play, right? The Bodyguard, it is not. And there's recently
it's not indignity. It's not indignity to theater to perform.
Right. Yeah. So there was a revival of this on Broadway. I'm forgetting what theater it was now. Let me see if I can find that. Not that it matters, but I like to be clever. I like to know what I'm talking about. The Hudson Theater. Okay, there we go. Yeah. So it's this production at the Hudson Theater. And notably, this was a predominantly black production, which is, you know, different than it's been for the majority of the times that it's been performed. And specifically, one of my favorite actors, Wendell Pierce, was playing the protagonist role of Willie Loman. He's really amazing, classically trained actor. And he was put in the absolutely horrifying position as an actor where he himself had to diffuse a violent, first emotionally and then physically, altercation in like the second or third row. Basically somewhere around like the beginning of the show, these people start talking really loudly, and then they start yelling at each other, and they start yelling at the play itself and sort of trying to interact with the characters. And then eventually it did sort of become kind of a mini riot, and the people who started this were actually arrested in the middle of the play. But it was so kind of intense and impossible to ignore. And everybody, one of the big questions that, I mean, we can't get around is like, where the heck were the ushers in this situation, or where the heck was theater security in this situation? But for whatever reason, and because of whoever's failures, Wendell Pierce, as the protagonist of the show, has to break character and try to kind of therapize them off the cliff.
Right.
And he's saying things to them like, very, very paternal, kind of loving appeals like, hold on, talk to me, I'll make a deal with you, I'm going to ask them to let you stay, you know, you will not be kicked out if you can just calm down, I'm going to ask them to let you stay, I'll pull some strings. So he's trying to kind of negotiate with them, and then it becomes kind of a much more emotionally charged, personal, kind of vulnerable plea to them, where he's saying, you know, no, I've waited too long for this. I've waited too long to play a role like this in my career. Don't take this from me. You've waited too long for this. You know, don't take this from yourself, right? So he starts making this really vulnerable artistic appeal to them, all of which is ignored. And it's the videos. I mean, so many people, since we're living in the age of TikTok and YouTube and everything, so many people caught different angles of this. And it's really heartbreaking to watch him try to appeal to these people, having, you know, again, in contrast to The Bodyguard, the musical, a very traditional theatrical experience, and just ruining it for everyone, including the cast. And then juxtapose that with one that happened very, very recently to the time of recording. And, you know, if you have kids in the car, maybe skip 5 minutes forward for this one. But I think it's the LA Philharmonic at the Walt Disney Theater in Los Angeles, was doing a performance, at which point a woman in the audience had, and I quote the article here when I say this, a full body orgasm, a full body screaming orgasm during the kind of musical crescendo of the Philharmonic performance. In this case, the performers did not stop playing. They sort of bemusedly considered it a compliment and tried to just move past it. But like, both of those things are completely insane. They are stateside. They are in the context of much more kind of traditional or stereotypically highfalutin or even snobbish expressions of theatrical experience. And yet they are completely batshit. I mean, I've just never heard of anything like that at all.
Yeah. I mean, obviously that, like, completely, it's just kind of beyond out of control regardless. But like, I'm going to say, I'm just assuming in the latter case that ecstasy was involved, and let's just say a non-naturally produced. Because I just, I'm a classical music fan, but that's just not actually a physical response that's possible. I'm just going to tell you right now. But
we talk a lot about being moved by beauty on this podcast.
Don't be moved like this. If you feel like you're going to be moved like that, stay home. Probably see a doctor. Probably see a doctor.
Like, step out and use the restroom for a minute, for God's sake. Like, what is happening?
There's something wrong here. I mean, it's extra wild because, like, classical performances can be like so formal that even I can feel sort of confused about it sometimes, because, like, I mean, literally, I was at a piano performance a couple months ago, and, like, this old lady, it's not always old ladies, but just happened to be old ladies in these stories. This old lady, like, down the way, had a slight cough. I mean, it was the end of the winter, and, like, she had a slight dry cough. And so every, I don't know, 10 minutes or so, she would kind of, like, give a little, like an old lady dry cough. Mm-hmm. And, like, there's this guy who was sitting up in front of me who would, like, whip around and give her this death glare for, like, a minute after she coughed, which of course she couldn't see, so just as well. But, like, anyway, so there's this thing that, I mean, you're supposed to be so completely quiet and everything that, like,
and then this woman shows up and has such an intense screaming physical experience that everybody doesn't look at her, they just politely stare straight ahead and try to get through it because no one knows what to do.
Yeah, because everyone's a lot uncomfortable. Yeah, exactly right. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, no, it's funny. Like, I mean, I think another aspect of kind of what's going into how I feel like I don't really know how to respond to these things or to thinking about it, you know, is that just knowing that theater going, concert going, all that kind of stuff, like having it be like a formal, everyone sits in an assigned seat, and that you know, you don't make any noise and you're not even supposed to cough or whatever. Like, you know, this is a more modern, like this is more recent development, you know, I mean, like, and like the Globe, of course, is a classic kind of example of what that looked like in the 16th and the 17th century, you know, is just that like this would be a pretty rowdy place, you know. I mean, the wealthier people would have seats, and then the wealthiest people would have kind of more or less box seats, but you might also be having sex in your box seats, or something pretty close to it, which are like, it's a small theater. Everything's like, it's all in the round, right? That's the whole point. Like everything's up on everybody's business, you know, but so there's just like there was a certain different sense of how that goes. A different example that I know more about, of course, from a different culture, but would be kabuki theater. You know, kabuki, especially by the like 17th and 18th century, is the super duper 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 lowbrow. It's your kind of like, yeah, it's your super duper lowbrow form of entertainment for just like urban dwellers in especially in what's now Tokyo, in like the 18th century, say. It's unbelievably cheap. Like all the performances are unbelievably cheap. There are aspects of it that are like literally hard to imagine. I mean, like there are kabuki plays that go on for more than 12 hours. Like
oh my gosh,
they're essentially performed kind of like in shifts, but like kind of just rotating and just going on. They'll go on for several days, you know, and like you buy a ticket for one thing and you're kind of gumming and going and you're eating and like everyone's drunk, including the actors. And there's a lot of like, kabuki was like very interactive by its nature. That's like a really important part of it, was that you would like, it was expected that you would but presumably this is expected because it was just like a fact that you couldn't get around, like that the audience would be screaming at the characters and at their favorite actors and these kinds of things, and that the actors were expected / it was just accepted, and so this became its own thing, that the actors would be yelling back at them, mostly in character, but not necessarily. It developed all these things where like it completely changes the shape of the plays even. So like they end up creating this theatrical. There's so much audience interaction. I mean, they're throwing crap on the stage. They're throwing things at people. I mean, literal crap, rotten things. I mean, these are everything you could imagine, right?
Right. Yeah.
And they're getting it back as well, of course. And then it becomes like the audience interaction becomes such a big thing that like they'll put like thrusts out into the audience, you know, which you're sort of imagining. This seems like crazy, but like, again, that you're not necessarily having seats. You might just have people be milling around, you know, but you'll put like a thrust out into the audience. And then like in really big scenes, like usually the hero, but sometimes the villain he would perform his scene, and then he would run out onto the thrust, which is literally a runway. He would run out onto the runway and just like pose, you know, just like people would like throw things at him and he would be like posing, and he would be like Arnold Schwarzenegger posing.
This feels very like World Federation Wrestling meets.
Oh, it is the theater of WTF. That's exactly right. That's probably the best, actually. That's probably the best analogy for it. Like WWF, only it was trying actually to be theater and not theater trying actually to be wrestling. Like, so it was just like this, you know. Of course, in the meantime, the kabuki has basically died. Now it's this kind of like high class art form that like
simply because it's old and old
schools
things
go
are
to
classy.
yeah. I mean, of course it's not even that old. I mean, it's not quite as old as Shakespeare, but like in this form, but like but regardless, I mean, it's cool. These plays are awesome. They're really fun to read, and like they're cool. I got to go to a Kabuki performance once, and it was really great. But but now it's like it's basically a dead art form. He's kind of fossilized, so like school groups go to it, but there it is, but like I had a friend who was super duper duper into Kabuki and like memorized, because some of them it had become formalized enough that they were like set things that the audience should like yell at certain moments, and then people would say these things back and it would kind of provoke things, so almost like the audience's own lines of dialogue. And so my friend went to one of these Kabuki performances. This would have been in like the mid 2000s. And at the right moment yelled the right thing for the audience.
Oh, nice.
And everyone froze. And
that's wild.
Because that is not how it's done anymore. And
right.
Like it was not cool. Like all the Japanese people are like,
funny.
Not here, as if you just had an explosive personal experience in the seat next to them, so like there is some of this. I mean, like I don't know. I mean, like I feel like that's a loss. Now Kabuki was really its own particular thing. There isn't really a theater that's really its own particular kind of theatrical form. I'm not trying to say every kind of theater should be like that. Even in Japan at the time, there were other forms of theater that were not like that,
Sure.
But I do think that to some extent there's a little like, I know your analogy, your point at the beginning, I think was really interesting that like, yeah, to church you could bring like a little stuffed animal, but if you went to a concert, like, oh, absolutely not, like that. I don't know. Like I do really prize, especially at classical music, where like, if you have a fine ear, which I don't, but like I appreciate that there are people who have finer ears than I do. And I want to really respect that. And I want to respect and enable. I want my own presence there to be present to the thing as much as I possibly can and receive everything I possibly can. And I want that to be available in such a way that it enables, or at least doesn't hinder, other people who are better at experiencing this than I am from experiencing it in the way that they're able to. Like, I think that's really important and really deep. And at the same time, and I know these don't go together, but like, and at the same time, there does seem to be a certain amount of over formalization.
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting take, right? That maybe, I mean, I do think once you're getting, okay, so the part of me that wants theater to stay this very sacred space, is horrified by violence breaking out during The Bodyguard, or a principal member of the cast of Death of a Salesman having to talk to the audience, like talk them off the ledge. I mean, the part of me that that empathizes with those performers, the part of me that wants selfishly for theater to be this sacred space, cringes at that. But I'm also not dumb to the kinds of examples you're bringing up. I mean, I wasn't aware so much of Kabuki, but I know that in like Bollywood cinema, historically at least, maybe not quite as much now, but historically, these were very interactive, cinema screenings, right? People throwing things at the screen, and so much so that, certain American or British or Western filmmakers have been inspired by it. I mean, most notably Baz Luhrmann, created Moulin Rouge because he wanted to see if he could incite those same kinds of responses in a Western audience. Oh, funny. Yeah, right. Cool. Like he took his whole cast to go see like a 4-hour Bollywood thing in India. And he was like, I want to make something like that. I want to see if I can provoke that kind of response. So there's that. And there's also, like, I have this very sort of like core memory from being a kid of watching this HBO documentary about the composer Rossini, the guy who did Barber of Seville.
Oh yeah.
And how, like, I guess at this time, people, if they didn't like operas, would just get an angry mob together and go kill the composer. Like this was just like a very common thing to like burn down his house.
Yeah.
And so
I feel like that's a bad move. Yeah.
So like in the documentary, he is depicted as running back to his home to hide. And then we see this angry mob coming to his house after, Barber Seville has just opened, and he's terrified. He's like, I've got to flee. They're going to burn down my house. And it turns out this angry mob of people with actual torches are just there to tell him they really, really liked it.
Oh, it's a happy mob. See, nobody ever hears about happy mobs, but
no
this
one
is a
hears
happy
about
mob.
happy mobs. So that's sort of a core memory of like this guy being afraid he's going to die. And then we're like, oh no, we're just here to tell you we like it. No worries, man. So
what's your next piece? What's the next piece that you're working on? What do you say you're working on right now? How do you get your ideas?
So like legitimately, I know that there are spaces in theatrical experience where this kind of thing has been commonplace in the East, in the West, in kind of high level stuff like opera, in low level stuff like kabuki. And yet there is this part of me that's incredibly sad when I see Wendell Pierce like trying to calm down an audience member. And I don't know, like, as is the common narrative, audiences worse post-pandemic? Are we more selfish as a society where we are going to theater and instead of saying, I am here for this, we're going in with a posture of this is here for me.
Right.
This is fundamentally about my experience and my experience first and foremost. Are we becoming more selfish? Are we becoming more sort of insulated as the result of kind of lockdown and phones and all this stuff where I don't know how to act in a space, with that many people all kind of behaving formally, I mean, certainly, as Catholics, we could even project that in a sort of post-religious society where people don't have the experience of church as a formal cultural touchstone for everybody to kind of go back to, that of course no one would know how to act in theater, right? So is it that we're getting worse, or per the examples that you and I are bringing up from kind of times gone by, are we going back to normal? Are we kind of responding to theater again the way people always sort of have? And if we are, then what should the response of artists, actors, composers, set designers, puppeteers, all the kind of people who this podcast is for, all the kind of people that we like to hang with, what's their response supposed to be if theater is no longer the formal thing that they kind of signed up for? I mean, these are kind of existential questions to be asking about humanity and about the nature of art and stuff, all being stemmed by, riots breaking out in random jukebox musicals.
Yeah, right. Yeah, right. Exactly. I mean, yeah, there's certainly part of it too. It's just like, I mean, we hear about these things and they're sensational and they make a lot of news. Partly we hear about them and they make a lot of news because we have all these techniques to hear about them now. So like, I mean, because there's the TikTokings and there's the booking of faces and there's all these things, right? And I
don't know why I heard you say then sort of a Bill Cosby voice, just like there's the TikTokings and the Facebookings
and the booking of faces
and the Quaaludes in the pudding pop and the
Quaaludes in the pudding. Exactly, that's my point. So certainly part of it is we hear about these things more. Where I would never have heard about a disrupted theater performance in LA until a couple of years ago, right? Unless I was living in LA. So partly there's that. Now, some of these articles from the like English, specifically just from the English theaters, were the ones that where I saw this talked about explicitly, where you had these theater managers and saying like, this is the worst it's been in like 5 years. Like it's that they having a sense that this seems to be getting worse. And they would know. So, so I respect that. And I'm not trying to gainsay that. In like our experience, as you say, like we say, well, I've never seen this and you've never seen this. Like, well, I wouldn't expect to, right? Because like, we're just dealing with two anecdotal experiences. And that means that like of the hundreds of thousands of theatrical performances that have gone on in, let's just say like, America and the continental US, continental Europe in like the last year, this very small number of things didn't happen in a theater that we were in, this is not totally surprising, you know?
Right.
But like, so just to say like, okay, well, you know, it's, I don't know, where it's like crisis and stuff like this, I can be a little bit allergic about, but that's probably just prejudicial. But at the same time, I mean, like, I do recognize some of these things, right? Like it makes sense. I mean, there is also a certain socioeconomic thing here, like Broadway and West End shows are really expensive, you know. And if you're not living in New York, like you come to visit, like everyone has this kind of expectation that like, maybe I don't like theater. I've never gone to theater or anything like this, but like I'm in New York, so I have to. And then you spend like, I don't know, $150 per ticket. And like, that too can kind of contribute to, I mean, first thing, you really don't know how to act there. And then like, there's the I'm on vacation sort of like, Vegas rules,
and I've paid situation. A lot for this, so I've
paid a lot for this. So like, I mean,
which is interesting because I mean, you know, juxtapose that to your Kuba Cube example or the Bollywood example I proposed, right, or the Globe Theater example. Our justification for that pretty consistently is like, oh well, these are incredibly cheap to access art forms, so of course people are going to behave badly. And now our argument is sort of the inverse, where it's like, well, these are incredibly expensive, so of course rich people are going to act like trash. And maybe like theater for poorer people is actually still doing okay.
Well,
maybe
there's a weird yeah, but again, I'm not. That's just, part of the problem is I'm not saying that these are rich people. I'm saying that people who came to New York on a trip, you know.
Oh, sure, okay,
and like,
right.
and it's like there's this big cultural thing. Like, well, I have to go see like a
tourist theater,
tourist theater, you know. And again, like I'm not reducing anything to like any one of these causes. I'm just saying like here are some things that are interesting that are certainly at play here, you know.
Yeah, these are factors that we would be stupid to ignore as contributing.
Right. But I like the way you put it. They say like, rather than however you put it, like I want to be here for this, but like this is here for me. You know, when I was thinking about this, when I was thinking about these kind of some of these cultural, social, economic kind of things that are at play here, specifically in like Broadway and West End, maybe. I was thinking about like I had this moment of realization, like this like wow moment where I realized one can summarize like the Chicago theory of driving in 3 words. It's my turn.
Oh yeah.
And that's
it. Sure.
It's just like, it doesn't matter what it is. Like, it's my turn. It doesn't matter. Just how people change lanes, how people get off of exits, get onto exits, every driving move, like the one guiding principle is it's my turn. Whatever that means, however dangerous it is.
Selfishness rooted in a like sense of justice that only favors you.
Exactly. And so I was thinking about it in this context because and I'm not even remotely saying there's any shared causality, but like I recognize that move in what's happening, particularly the example of the sort of drunk lady and her husband who were involved in the death of a salesman performance, like just reading at least according to some audience narrations of what had happened, however trustworthy they may or may not be. It really sounded like that. Where it's exactly that combination of kind of like sort of this radical social solipsism, a very strong sense of entitlement, strong commitment to like but then also combined with, and this is the thing that gets me every time, combined with exactly the way you put it, this sense of justice that only applies to me, you know? So like, I am owed
or only
this.
Favors me.
Only obliges everyone, but only favors me. And you know, that is, that's a really toxic thing, you know, like there are modes of theater and like engagement with cultural productions where I would be pretty happy if you had spaces and modalities that could be pretty crazy. I'm not saying like it's an experimental theater, guys, everybody here, and like go ahead and bring your tomatoes, and that's it's too like cute, it's too
right,
like
gimmicky,
but if those things kind of organically developed in certain theatrical spaces and like modalities of writing theater and then like doing theater and stuff, like, well, okay, those things happen and I wouldn't be against that, but there's certainly there's no going back. I mean, you have these like sort of formalized theaters, even just the physical spaces of the theaters and these kinds of things. I mean, like you can't turn that space into a space where people are like roaming around and being kind of rowdy and dancing in the aisles, So like,
but I guess that's what I'm existentially asking. Like, I want the answer to be as simple as these kind of producers are making it out to be, that yeah, for whatever reason, and maybe the sort of buzzwordy pandemic, that we can blame everything on, has caused a kind of radical selfishness and a lack of knowing how to behave. And even this other factor that we've talked about, revenge tourism, right? Where it's like, I was shut down for a while, so now you can't stop me from booking this trip, or you can't stop me from doing this play. Like, no one's ever going to keep me locked in ever again. So I'm going to,
right.
So like, I would love for the answer to be as simple as that, because then in theory, people could sort of be, to use a problematic term, kind of re-civilized to understand how to engage with art again. But there is this little nagging voice in the back of my head that says, no, like, of enough examples, whether it's the Kabuki or whether it's Rossini or whether it's the Globe or whatever, that says this is kind of how people historically in a lot of contexts respond to art. And maybe for the past couple of decades, we've all mutually and silently agreed to participate in a pantomime where we all act like we're better than that. And now we're seeing that charade fall apart, and we can't put it back together. And maybe this is like where things are going. And maybe artists and actors and everybody else have to kind of get used to that world and swallow that pill. And I don't want that to be true. But again, that there is a little nagging voice that says that it might be.
It could be. I mean, I feel like I would need a lot more. I would feel like I would need a lot more examples, a lot more widespread, even if just in a single country, before I would believe that this is actually like, that these are the first pebbles of an avalanche that changes the landscape, right now, this just sounds like scattered bad behavior, to be honest. That even if it is more scattered bad behavior than it's been before, it still seems like scattered bad behavior to me. But I could be wrong. Again, like if this does actually sort of pick up steam and it does in fact turn out to be the first pebbles of a landslide or an avalanche, then there we go. And then we think about it differently.
I guess what I'm concerned about as a creative person, you were saying before, maybe some of these things were happening and it's just that we're more aware of it now. And then you offset that by saying, but of course the producers and those who would know are saying that it is actually worse. I guess my concern is, because you and I are more aware of it now, does that then inspire more kind of copycat behavior like that, where people think
that's always the trouble.
Okay,
yeah.
Or this will be a good way of getting, some buzz around me for, my 5 minutes of fame or whatever. And it does, I think it's the, what's the takeaway for anybody who's appreciating art? I would hope that obviously it's, don't be an asshole, like go in and with a posture of I'm here for this, not this is here for me, and try to bring yourself to it in kind of a reverent way and honor all the work and the time and the blood and the sweat and the tears that all of the various brilliantly talented creative people have put into this, whether it's an objectively good show or not. But I do think the answer for what do we do as artists on the creative side on the backstage side, I think that answer is harder. Do you get used to this and just continue to perform through it? Do you do what Wendell Pierce did and say, I'm stopping the show, I'm breaking character, I'm calling this out? You know, do you shut the show down to protect your cast and they all leave until the dispute has broken down? Like, what is the creative's posture to the possibility that this is actually getting worse or could?
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's funny because at this point, it still seems mostly the Bodyguard example was different. They had to shut the thing down because there was a certain amount of chaos. But some of these other examples, like I was at a play once in DC where from the Shakespeare Company, which was really Shakespeare Theater Company, which was really great. Is a performance of Julius Caesar, and like in the middle of, I mean, it was literally the absolutely worst time conceivably imaginable for an interruption to happen, because it's like Brutus has just murdered Caesar and he's like standing with
spoilers, dude.
Oh,
spoilers.
Dude, bro, sorry. Someone has just done something bad to somebody. That's all I have to say. And he's like standing with his hands dripping blood, like he's supposed to like soliloquize over his body, you know? And like he's just starting this, and this giant fire alarm goes off. And which of course is like, God. This is the stuff you practice, right, as an actor. But like it was cool to see, because like he froze and everyone freezes for like, I mean, there's only like one other person on the stage who's supposed to be alive, I think. But it freeze for like maybe 15 seconds until and then when it's clear that this is not a passing affair, everyone just straightens up and they walk right off the stage. And it was this like super impressive, like very pro, just like, you know, like no awkwardness, no whatever. We're just like, now we're off, you know? So like, obviously,
so maybe it matters.
Professional actors like know this already, and like these guys do too. I mean, it's super impressive that that Pierce was able to do this in this really, it's just highly, I mean, it's compassionate, but it's also highly professional. Like he knows what he's doing, and you know, and that's all really great. So part of it is just, well, maybe there's this increased intensity of like, well, I need to kind of have strategies and plans for like how we maintain like what does professionalism mean as an actor,
right? Like actually have contingency, like as a producer or director or whatever, saying, hey, regardless of what you've done before, like if something bad happens, this is our response as a cast, you know?
Yeah, these kinds of things that we do.
We're a cast that's going to call it out and break character versus we're a cast that's going to just pause and leave the stage. Like,
yeah.
Let's have something figured out beforehand so that actors don't have to figure it out in the moment.
I think that would be really cool, and not like, you know, this doesn't have to be silly like a, you know, like a, like what do they call them? Like an emergent, like, you know, an invader response plan, you know, like every school is supposed to have or whatever. It's just like
the Northmen are coming.
When you get word that the Northmen are at the gates, what do you do? No, but like, but I like that. I mean, I like that point that you made, that like, is this the kind of show with the kind of cast where like, we're going to give as we're given and we're going to give back as we're given? Is this the kind of thing where we're going to break characters? Is this the kind of thing where we drop the curtain? Is it a good thing where you walk away? Like whatever. Like, I mean, I think that's cool. Like it's an interesting way of thinking about it. And maybe these things already exist, you know, I just don't know, but, that's interesting. I do think that because I was thinking about, so what can I do? I mean, there's different things that I think, so there's different things for the beholder. Cause I think in the end, there's certainly social and, cultural problems that are large and complicated, and definitely I think really at play. I mean, I do think that there was a general kind of crassification of the cultures that I have known in the time following March 2020, basically. I just think that there was a profound crassification of certainly of American culture, and then but of others as well. And I just don't think it makes any sense to ignore that. Like I think that's there, you know, and we have to deal with it and try to address it and learn to be able to grow out of it, you know, rather than just like kind of closing our eyes and hoping it goes away. So I think there's something of what I would call there's a pressure to learn how to behold. So that's one thing. If you think about an audience and like how you engage as an audience member and like how you do all these things. So that's one thing, is like learning how to behold, which is really important. And then as an artist, whether you're the one writing or creating or producing the whole thing, or just or singing a part of it, dancing a part of it, acting a part of it, whatever it might be, there is that strong sense of like, well, I would say that there's a twofold thing here, is that like I think there's a strong obligation on beholders not to go to works of art just because they think they should. That includes whether like, I'm in New York and like,
so I have to see a play, or even this is a show I should see because it's a socially important play.
Right. Yes. And that includes like, or like I'm in Vienna and I'm going to go to the opera because like, if you're in town and you're going to go to an opera, like, but you don't like the opera or whatever, like, don't go to things because you think you should.
To art. Yeah. Don't go to art out of duty or FOMO.
Yeah. Just like, go to the things that you want to go to. And like, if you really don't like them, whatever. This doesn't contradict like my basic impulse that people need to learn how to behold things that are difficult to behold. That's important, but if you know you're not going to like it, you don't want it, you're not in a place where you want to be ready to receive this right now, then don't. Like this example of the ladies the lady at the death of a salesman, again, like audience reports is like that this is a lady who is like very profoundly under the influence of one or several mood altering substances, and you think like, I get like, having a couple glasses of wine or beer or whatever to like make the evening go smoother, especially if you're not totally sure that the kind of thing is going to be your jam. I totally get that. But like, if this is a thing that you have to kind of anesthetize yourself to with like getting all hopped up and jazzed up on all kinds of things, then like, maybe just get hopped up at home. I mean, the other option would not be to get hopped up. But I'm just saying, if that's going to happen.
No. I think we're just going to cut the episode at just get hopped up at home. I think that's as good a
more lessons from Father Gabriel Toretta. OP. Just get hopped up at home.
Yeah, bad things aren't bad if they're in a bad show, and just get hopped up at home. These are the lessons. Really good.
Yeah, these are the pull quotes. These are the pull quotes for the episodes.
Takes.
Yeah, I'm here for you.
But no, I like some of these thoughts here, and I think there's room to continue the discussion, and I hope the discussion will be continued, because obviously this kind of stuff is at its worst when you ignore it or you pretend that it isn't a problem, because that's how people get disrespected and hurt. So with that in mind, if you're a creative, take care of your audiences, take care of your creatives. Don't take for granted that they're going to be honored and respected, right? Ultimately, human dignity is more important than the aesthetics of your art, and make sure that your people are cared for. And if you're an audience member, don't be a schmuck. Remember that people put real work into this. Wherever theater's going, we're not going to be worse off for remembering the dignity of the people around us. And I don't think we're going to be worse off for remembering that in whatever context or form, art is not here for us. We are here for art, and we need to submit ourselves to it. But above all, with all this in mind, go forth and create cool things.
This has been Created Things, a production of Art, Soul, and Mind, hosted by Jacob Flores Popchek and Father Gabriel Toretta, produced by Kyle Meineke and Jessica Flores Popchek. Theme song by Federico Carranza. For more on this podcast and the artists featured, follow us on Instagram at Created Things Podcast, and subscribe on YouTube, Spotify, and wherever fine podcasts are streamed.